Hello, welcome. This is the last day of our Congress, the last morning of our Congress, and I'll be speaking about nicotine abuse and addiction. Professor Ibrahim made an introduction, but nicotine addiction is an addiction itself, and it also is together with psychiatric disorders. So in order to understand this, we have to look at the neurobiology of nicotine addiction. In my presentation, I'll be speaking about nicotine addiction and some aspects of nicotine addiction, and then I'll look at biological factors like award mechanism, conditioning, and effects of nicotine, and then withdrawal and craving and abstinence I will be speaking about. The world met with nicotine in 1492. America was using tobacco, and during the discovery of the continent, Christopher Columb extends it to the world. The tobacco was first used to treat headache, but then it was presented to the French queen to eliminate her headache, and then later on the plant was named as nicotine. I'll give you some striking figures. Every day all around the world, 12,000 people, and on an annual basis 5 million people die of nicotine, and Turkey ranks the 10th among the countries which use the highest amount of nicotines, and we also produce some percent of nicotine all around the world. Addiction is a chronic distress which starts with stopping using it and then restart using it. Previously, tolerance was a must. However, recently compulsive use is not there, so we can't speak of addiction. And the impulsive characteristics and award system contributes to substance abuse. For nicotine, the biggest addictive or addiction substance in cigarettes is nicotine. Tobacco is there in different formats. Mainly it's there with inhalation of the smoke, and the smoke's addiction potential is related with increase of acetaldehyde, and it also increases the effective monoamine, dopamine, and nicotine patch and use of chewing gum. Some addictions were reported. There are some factors which are supporting addiction with emotional stimulants. In DSM-5, substance abuse and substance addiction are combined under substance use disorders, and this is called as a tobacco use disorder. I won't give you each and every detail, but 10 and 11, Article 10 and 11 are about abstinence and tolerance criteria. They are accompanied by the use of tobacco. Why neurobiology is important? Because we come up with this factor all the time. The better we understand, more effective and personalized treatments will be there to do some good to the patient. Dopamine is the most spoken transmitter. and this is at the center of neurobiology. Mesolimbic circuit is there in the brain, which contributes to the award system. And there is also ventral tegmental area, and the nucleus accumbens, it reaches there. There are neurons inside this, and it gets input from prefrontal cortex. So nucleus accumbens, the neurons inside it secrete dopamine as a result of nicotine intake. And award mechanism, there is a positive conditioning for reward, and it creates or evokes pleasure. There are natural awards like food, resources, sexuality, social interactions. In addition to these natural rewards, there are synthetic awards as well, which include nicotine, amphetamine, cocaine, or opioids. So these synthetic awards compete with the natural ones, and they outperform them, and they deteriorate the award mechanism through different means. These are among the natural award resources. So all in all, the biggest difference between natural and synthetic awards is that the biggest vital target in synthetic ones is to find and abuse the substance, and contrary to the natural awards, this impairs health and functionality. And there is another difference. Synthetic awards invoke dopamine release in a stronger and more pleasurable way. We're all the time speaking about dopamine, however, opiates, GABA, glutamate, serotonin are also there at the forefront. You can see the neurotransmitter regulation of mesolimbic reward. There is a number of neurotransmitters in the system: nucleus accumbens, and the central area, acetylcholine, is just like the natural nicotine. And dopamine is like the natural amphetamine, cocaine of the brain, glutamate, and the others have a role, all have a role in this system. Opiates inhibit locus ceruleus by inhibiting synapses. So there are antagonists, and there is an opioid and cannabinoid reward effect, and that effect is no longer there with the effect of alcohol intake. Dopamine, in addition to award or reward, has extensive dopaminergic projections, and this addiction has become a compulsion, and it also triggers the brain and turn into a brain disease. These materials start with impulsivity and continue with compulsivity. It becomes a circle, a vicious cycle. It becomes a cycle. So in the ventral cycle, they start an adaptation cycle, and it turns into a compulsion. Impulsivity center is the ventralistriatum thalamus, and this is the culprit circuit is there in the brain, and there is another brain circuit in the dorsal striatum, which are related with impulsivity and compulsivity, and the passage between them is about drug addiction, gambling, and obesity, like binge eating. So an action starts with impulsivity and transforms into compulsivity. And in this circuit, by the way, this is related to prefrontal cortex, if that control mechanism is not working at a top-down approach, or if there is a severe impulsive or compulsive effect from down to top, then a vicious cycle, as I mentioned, occurs. Migration from ventral to dorsal is important in the mechanism of addiction. Here, hippocampus and amygdala are there as well. So these impulsivity and compulsivity cycle, there are stimulus. So memory, emotional effects, cognitive effects, creates an effect. And what is the basis of reward mechanism and compulsivity? It's about enhancing effect and conditioning. We know it in psychology. Classical conditioning is about Pavlov's dog. I don't want to give you the details. Meat and a bell rings and meat is given to the dog, and after time the dog gives the same response to the bell without a meat. So this can also be extended to cigarette smokers. The cigarette packs, people, environment, those smokers like this cafe, these friends. So some visual factors create a conditioning for cigarette smoking. And there is another conditioning, and in this process the stimulus is there. This is about performative conditioning. So it has an enhancing effect, and this enhancing effect becomes a habit. If that behavior is there for pleasure, due to the pleasure it gives, then it is the positive enhancement. However, if there are negative aspects, then it's called as a negative enhancement. So nicotine is both a negative and positive enhancer. For nicotine's effects, it has effects in VTA. It has receptors, and it has effects on nicotinic-cholinergic receptors. Two types are important: alpha-4 beta-2 and alpha-7. Alpha-4 is postsynaptic. Alpha-7, it can be presynaptic or postsynaptic. However, we focus on presynaptic because the post one is about cognitive mechanisms. They both contribute to the secretion of dopamine. These receptors are located in this part of the brain. There are three important mechanisms. One of them is postsynaptic alpha-4 beta-2 receptors. In those dopamine receptors, they release dopamine, and they are connected to alpha receptors, and they have an impact on GABA receptors. GABA is an inhibitor neurotransmitter, and there are alpha-4 beta-2 receptors, and which creates a desensitization, and when desensitization is there, gamma cannot inhibit anything, which results in uncontrolled dopamine release. So these three mechanisms are important in dopamine release. There are other neurotransmitters as well. These are glutamatergic system, serotonin, which has been studied for years, endocannabinoids, and nitric oxide. They have an impact on central nervous system. Glutamate is responsible for strengthening effects, and it is also mediating the unpleasure which is observed when nicotine is not there, is not taken by the patient. Endocannabinoid has been used. Cigarette smokers in their hippocampus 5-HT1A receptor is increasing, and this has improved the symptoms in the reward system. Alpha-4 beta-2 receptors, I want to talk about them. This enhancing effect is there with chronic pulsatile impact. The affinity of nicotine is higher. These receptors are in the resting state. They look like that in the resting state. After cigarette smoking, receptors are opening, dopamine is released, and after that there is desensitization. It lasts for smoking one cigarette, let's say. After desensitization, there is an upregulation to have adaptation, and they're in search for a dopamine. So in order to compensate that mechanism, there is the upregulation. However, with this system, there's an increased craving. Receptors are opening with cigarette, but it is growing with time. So this is combined with craving, reward sensitivity. I'd like to talk a little bit about abstinence. Nucleus accumbens, dopaminergic and serotonergic transfers are reduced. HPA and CRF is impaired, and in withdrawal there is an increased HPA and HCHT. CRF receptor antagonists selectively block the search for substance, and in acute abstinence there is a decreased neuropeptide level. Cravings and wanting and craving has a huge role in this addiction. So acute deprivation is about creation of a memory, and it can be triggered by a stimulus. So this here, the substance itself or a stimulus may trigger the brain. The substance itself is related with medial PFC, and it is there with glutamatergic transmission. So there are pathways between amygdala and PFC which contribute to the memory, and in stress there is CRF and neuroepinephrine activation in the brain. Thank you for your attention.